everyone. So this is the end. And I know that there's a lot of expectations, so I want a disclaimer. We're not going to answer your questions. We're not going to solve all the problems. I'm going to start by that. So thank you very much for your patience, for being here. And welcome to this session to discuss PIAAC Next. So for those of you that are relatively new to PIAAC, PIAAC Cycle 1 took place 11-12, reporting 13. PIAAC Cycle 2, because of the pandemic, took place 22-23, reporting 24. And now we are planning for the next one, which would be 32, 33, 34, reporting in 34. So the question is, what will the world look like, and what will PIAAC look like to reflect the changes in the world? So first, I want to organize the session around the developmental cycle that I see of PIAAC. So I always say to countries that we need to start with the policy impact that we expect from the study. That's going to be part A. Part B is going to be what to measure, what to assess. That's going to be part B. Part C will be how to assess, because that's a major challenge. We are trying to address a diverse population, 16 to 65, that are in households. So it's not as simple as finding students within a classroom. So how to assess plays a big role in that. And then finally, I want to go to the last session, which would be in terms of disseminating results. How do we tell the story? So this is a cycle, and that's why I want to start with that. And then in this context, I feel that PIAAC plays, is within a critical tension, right? We're being asked to remain relevant. We're being asked to follow changes in society. At the same time, we are being asked to maintain comparability with past cycles. And I think we need to find a balance that works with there. So while innovation is essential, trust in the data must also be preserved. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to ask each of my 5 panel members, I'll give them 1 minute, to introduce themselves and answer one question. What is the single most important thing PIAAC must deliver in the next cycle? And then we're going to go to the details. And I'm going to start with James.
Good afternoon. I'm James Davison. I work for Department for Education in England. I also sit as co-chair of the board of participating countries for PIAAC, which I've done for a few years now. So I come to this with a vested interest that the planning cycle goes smoothly again, but also with a bit of a legacy of how it's gone in the past as well. I think there's the old curse about living in interesting times, and I think that's what we are at the moment. But it's also very exciting as well, because we're at the brand new start of the cycle, and it's within our power to plan it within the it's within our gift to plan it as we see fit. I think we'll get into the nitty gritty about what that entails over the session. But like Claudia said, the obvious tension is going to be between the relevance in the 2030s. And we've already covered many of the phenomena that's likely to loom large then, and trend data back to the 2010s. I think over recent months they've already started discussions between the PIAAC Secretariat, the Strategic Development Group, and the Bureau, which so far I think have been fairly sympathetic to the need to simplify PIAAC in terms of administration and to make it more cost effective. And I think inevitably that will have an impact on comparability with previous cycles. But this week, with the board of participating countries taking place before this conference, those ideas have been exposed to the board for the first time in reality. And I think there's already some sort of tension emerging, but I think we'll cover those in detail over this session. But I'll let you have a guess as to which end of the spectrum of relevance and trend of the spectrum I sit. But,
Thank you. Beatrice, you're going to be next.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Beatrice Rammstedt. I'm Vice President of GESIS, and I'm professor at the University of Mannheim. And I have been involved in PIAAC even before its beginning. So even in the very first visions of PIAAC, I was involved. And And I'm wearing 3 different hats in the context of PIAAC. I've been the NPM for Germany. I'm still part of the international consortium planning for the PIAAC. And I'm a social emotional skill expert, and I've been working with the OECD, developing the module that's implemented in PIAAC now. Given this expertise, I come more from the researcher perspective. And this is really, for me, the very unique feature on the second cycle of PIAAC, to have a combined data set of cognitive and non-cognitive skills. And this is really unique for researchers, but I think also for policymakers, that we see the impact of both cognitive and non-cognitive skills from a population representative, international comparative point of view. And what we see within PIAAC right now is that we have a subset of countries that spontaneously decided to include a extensive, slightly more extensive questionnaire that allows to measure specific facets of the non-cognitive skills. And when we analyze the data now, that clearly shows that a much more nuanced picture emerged based on these facets. And I think this is really a vision for upcoming cycles, where we really see these facets are highly valuable. They allow a much better understanding of the impact of non-cognitive skills for major life outcomes.
Thank you. Sanju?
Thanks. First of all, I'd like to cheer on Claudia and the team for undertaking such a Herculean task of really thinking very deep about transforming, can I use the word transforming PIAAC to make it relevant and future ready. I think it's definitely not easy. It's extremely difficult, because I had a read back from my colleagues who are attending the BPC. I used to be in BPC, but I'm no longer in BPC. They had a lot of very robust discussions and taking place. So first of all, my name is Sunju. I'm currently the Chief Skills Officer of SkillsFuture Singapore. I have been following PIAAC for a long time. Can I say that, for a long time? I have changed 3 job roles ever since, and then still with PIAAC. If you were to ask me about what is one thing most important that PIAAC must deliver in the next cycle, I would say that if you look at the historical origin of PIAAC, we can say that the lineage with pizza is very close. So a lot of time, the focus has been trying to inform education and lifelong learning policy. But with the fast-changing business environment, I would venture to say that the next phase of PIAAC, the insights has to inform beyond education and lifelong learning policy. It has to move from just asking what education can do more, to what labor market policy can do more, to what industrial policy should do more. So I think earlier on we have Caroline from World Employment Associations. I love her. I love what she said, because this is exactly what Singapore is trying to do. Is over the last 5 years, we have been trying to create a skill taxonomy for the economy and using it to predict and anticipate the skills needed for Singapore. And that will drive both what workplaces need to think about skills and what education sector need to think about how to keep the curriculum relevant. But this whole skill taxonomy today is disjointed with what PIAAC is trying to say. So there is a glossary issues of what skills are we talking about. So the employer is confused when we release, which I talk about, I think the last answer I'm going to talk about the communication part is, when we say you are not using people in the right manner because they are high skilled, but you're not using them, the employer say, what the heck are you talking about? So I think there is this disjoint about what the country is trying to do. I think from Mariana from Wind Energy to what Caroline from World Employment Association, there is a need for us to think about the language of skills. So I think the beauty and the strength of PIAAC is to help the world to understand why skills matter. And the why skills matter is not an education and lifelong learning policy issues. The demand side has to be coming into the equations. So I venture is the one thing that we need to do for the next cycle is we need to make skills matter for employers. They must understand what you're talking about. Thanks.
Thank you. With that, Ismael.
Thank you. My name is Ismael. So I am professor of applied economics here at University in Madrid, Paluqui University, Universidad Rey Juan Carlos. And my research is focused above all in economics of education. I was collaborating with the National Institute of Education Assessment 10 years ago, and I was in the first cycle of PIAAC. So and it was really interesting for Spain, the results and the conclusions. About what to do for the next cycle, well, the first most important point from my point of view is to have some idea of the identity of those who are answering who are doing the survey, because this would be the way of them matching this information with administrative records, for sure, keeping the anonymity, that's for sure, and all the private issues. But in this way, the research community will find many ways. Some of them maybe we cannot imagine of it, because researchers will have many ways of trying to link the information of PIAAC with some other administrative data. For instance, you can have the information of the labor market of those who are answering who are doing the PIAAC, or the education records. Well, many issues linking the data with administrative records will allow to make many other papers and ideas that might be not even thought of by PIAAC. I think this is really important because let me say that if not, for sure there will be ways of trying to find causal evidence using PIAAC, but it's not so easy finding in a cross-section data. It's not so easy finding causal evidence. Most of the times it's going to be correlational. And when you are making correlations, you are not going to publish in a very good top journal. So, and this is stopping some researchers from using PIAAC.
Thank you. And Katju, because she will bring a really interesting perspective to this conversation.
Thank you. So I'm Katju Holkeri. I come from Finland. I work in the Ministry of Finance, but I work with public governance issues in the Ministry of Finance. And I'm not in the PIAAC family, but I'm in the public governance family also in the OECD. And in the OECD, and been for many years, in the OECD public governance work, the current priority is reinforcing trust and strengthening democracy. And like I said, my viewpoint is probably a little bit an outsider's viewpoint to this work, but I think that besides labor market, we should think, when we think about skills, we should think about what skills are needed in the society. So how can we have those skills that we can be a full member in the society, not an outsider in the society, but a democratic actor in the society. I also hope that brings positivity to the labor market issue. But I think this is very important because we have to have this resilience in our society during uncertain times, and we definitely have a lot of turbulence and uncertain times around us. And we need these skills as a democratic actor also to fight pessimism, populism, and polarization, and those also hinder people from being active in the labor market. I'm not asking so much more from the PIAAC because I think that literacy is at the core, because in a democratic society, as a democratic actor, the one thing that is very important is to be able to understand, but also to be understood, and through that to have trust. So literacy, I'm very fond of the work, and I'm very fascinated about the work around literacy in PIAAC, but also maybe some issues about relational competencies. I'll maybe come back to those later, but listening, dialogue skills, that's also an important thing as a member of the society, as a democratic actor.
Thank you very much. So after this wonderful introduction, my name is Claudia Tamassia. I work at the OECD, and I lead the team working on PIAAC. So it is mine and my team's responsibility to come up with a cycle, what a cycle 3 will look like. So let's first talk about the policy implications of PIAAC. This is a wide range of views, and I think we're going to complement each other. So I'm going to start with Sun Jun. Singapore's skills taxonomy that you just talked about, I think, focus a lot on integrating workforce and industrial policy with education. How can PIAAC data strengthen this integration and help governments respond to this rapid technological change?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. Today, what we noticed on the ground when we started to push for skill first it doesn't mean skill is more important than qualification. It means when we make a decisions, we think about skills and not just qualification or anything else, or filtered by gender, filtered by age, filtered by work experience. We just want people to be blind about the rest of the consideration and think about skills, and skills as a key decision point. So if we were to ask ourselves, how can PIAAC data strengthen this integration between skill first and policy? I would say that one of them is, how do we help the general public and help the employer, help the education training institutions, help the ecosystem partner to understand what skills really means. And the kind of skills that today we currently directly assess are literacy, numeracy, and problem solving. And it is a bit remote to the employer and general public, because they say that if it's so foundational, why bother? If I already have, why bother? Unless I don't have, then I have to be concerned. If I already have, why bother? So I think that's one thing about communicating what we are really trying to measure. Number one is what kind of skill we're trying to measure. But the direct assessment of skills is key because it builds trust. It builds trust in the stakeholder in accepting that skills that matter. So the key thing is, what skills do we want to directly assess and measure? I think that's number one. Number two is really about, I would say that is the kind of skill. Today, I think that the enhancement in cycle 2 is fabulous in background questionnaire. We ask questions that is related to, with self-reporting, for the time being, self-reporting about social emotional skills, the kind of skills used at work, and also at the relationship between workplaces that are transforming very quickly, and what kind of skills tend to be used more. And this is the beginning of enriching the background questionnaire that will help policymakers to think better how to enable the workplaces to think about skills relevant and connect with the employer. So I think we need to strengthen on this part of what skills to directly assess, and then, which is I think number 3, topic number 3, and also how do we make the skills data relevant to workplace happening, which is rapidly transforming. Tasks are changing because of technological enhancement. Job roles are changing. The data set from Singapore, when we use local data set, we notice that all the job roles are changing. 53% of the job roles are changing the fastest. So what does it mean for employer? I think the connections with workplaces and employers is critical.
Okay, thank you. James, as representing, so I'm going to bring you back to your role within PIAAC, which is the Secretariat works on behalf of participating countries, and James has a play role in that as the co-chair of the BBC. So how can PIAAC be positioned to drive sustained policy engagement and improvement?
Okay. I think there's an issue here with what a country's results are. And when I came into PIAAC, first of all, it was around 2015, just as PIAAC Cycle 1 was being published, but I get the impression that in the run-up to that, England was quite complacent about the results that they were going to get. And it was a real wake-up call when it was fairly poor with an only average in literacy and below average in numeracy. But even more stark than that was that our 16 to 24-year-olds did particularly poorly in comparison to international cohorts, but also in relation to the 55 to 65-year-olds in England. So this prompted a real range of policy responses, not least fully funding additional literacy and numeracy for post-16 learners who had not achieved their level 2 GCSE at 16. And the burden of delivering that fell on David from the AOC, who you spoke to earlier, to his further education college sector that was already facing more general reductions in funding anyway. So, but it was a particularly ambitious policy response within the institutional framework and qualification and curriculum structures that are in place that was directly prompted by a PIAAC finding. So that sort of poor results translated into pretty much a very direct policy response intended to solve that problem. Now, so fast forward to cycle 2, and the results for England are fairly good. So we're above average in both literacy and numeracy, and our young adults have caught up with their international counterparts. In cycle 1, it was identified that we had 9 million people adults in England with low basic skills. In cycle 2, despite those benign results, we still had 8.5 million people with low basic skills in England. Now, you could argue that if that's a factor of a flow of better performing young people entering the 16 to 64 stock of adults, and the rest of the population perhaps not doing pretty much the same, and obviously demographic change and so on. But I think you've also got to appreciate that the PIAAC cycles so far have coincided with a 14-year-old Conservative-led government ending soon before cycle 2 was published. So it could be tempting for some to see PIAAC as an evaluation of that previous government's adult skills policy and its outcomes, and those fairly good results being perhaps glossed over by a new government of a different colour. But I'm not suggesting that by any moment, obviously. But obviously, PIAAC isn't an evaluation at all, and it can only report the skill levels at any one particular time and can't attribute causation to any particular policy intervention, but that's a different research question. What I can say, though, just finally, is a great attribute for PIAAC is that its level of detail, the skill attainment and ability at the lower end of the skill distribution levels. And now that sort of the dust has settled on the, it's okay in England now narrative, we're now looking far more deeply into the profile and characteristics of that 8.5 million low-skilled adults that will hopefully help us target resources in the future. We've already got a new curriculum and qualification initiatives being deployed aimed at that lower end of the skills spectrum, and that will definitely be informed by PIAAC data.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Katju and explain to me a little bit more, or expand on the fact that we know that declining literacy impacts democratic participation. So explain to me a little bit, how can PIAAC help inform these policies, improve communication standards, or even the skills that they need to participate in government?
Well, first of all, if I think about the PIAAC, and maybe I take the literacy again as an example, I think that one thing is important when we think about our population, for instance, in Finland. One thing is, of course, to what we can do and help to improve their skills, and that's what we've been talking a lot, but also in public services and in public communication, what do we have to take into account when we look at the results, and those are the people who we have to who we are aiming our public services to. So it's very important, for instance, we know in Finland from other studies or surveys that 14% of Finnish people need easy language. And that's what I said, that it's important in participation. You have to you have to understand to be able to have a voice and participate. But this 14% of people we don't actually have that much services or texts or web pages or digital services to people in easy language. Because easy language in itself is also a skill that you, or you have to master that. It's not that I could just switch, but I have to learn easy language. And we realized with this that we don't actually have those people who would do this. When we had COVID times, we didn't have anybody to write press releases in easy language. So it's very kind of not encouraging participation kind of stuff. But from the PIAAC and we know the literacy results, and we know where we should have, because it's not easy to increase resources immediately, for instance, on easy language. But we know then which are the communities, which are the people, which age groups, which are the most important services where we should aim the easy language information to. So I think this is also one thing in public communication, in public services. There are also channels in helping people to be more democratic actors and to participate, and the PIAAC information definitely helps in that.
I loved this definition of easy language. I don't think I have ever heard that before in terms of adapting to the low-skilled rather than just saying that the low-skilled can't participate in certain things. So thank you very much for that. Beatrice, I'm coming back to you now because there's a lot of conversation around the role of cognitive and non-cognitive skills, and we know that both of them matters for economic and social outcomes. So how can governments use these insights to design policies that foster non-cognitive skills alongside with the traditional skills of cognitive skills such as literacy and numeracy?
PIAAC clearly showed that both cognitive and non-cognitive skills have an impact on life, on civic engagement, on life success indicators, and labor market success. And both are more or less independent. So there is a unique contribution by both, by cognitive skills as well as non-cognitive skills. But there's also an interplay of the two. And what we do find is, we are reporting on that in a recent paper, is that cognitive skills are much stronger related to non-cognitive skills for lower educated. The contribution of personality or cognitive skill, non-cognitive skills on cognitive skills is about 3 times as high in low educated compared to higher educated. And so from a policy point of view, I would suggest that we need targeted designs where we foster non-cognitive skills for the lower educated, for those who are in lower secondary education, to help them improve their cognitive skills, but because especially for this target group, this is very supportive.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come to you now because there's a lot of conversations around skills mismatch and low returns. And when we talked earlier, you mentioned a lot of that. How can policy makers leverage these findings and better align education and labor market policies with the actual demand?
Yes, well, I would say that it's true that, for instance, PIAAC is finding that in Spain, also in the OECD, but in Spain there is a 43% mismatch of field of study reported by the own individuals. So it's also very high in the OECD, meaning that there is a lack of information when students, when individuals choose their field of study. So I think that it's quite interesting for the governments to let to know about using PIAAC about this mismatch. So we should increase the supply of some of the fields. For instance, here in Spain, there is a really very high demand for some studies. Many students cannot access to these studies in the universities or in higher vocational training because there is not enough offer. The supply is very short. And so what we find using PIAAC data is that this is a loss of potential. This is going to have a really very big impact in economic growth and in productivity. So we should increase the offer of this kind of, for instance, STEM studies in the universities, because many young students here in Spain would like to apply make an application to this kind of studies, and they cannot do it because there is not enough supply. So that's really one issue. Another one has to do with automatization and robotization. I think that PIAAC is focusing about this. In fact, already in the first cycle, you were mentioning David Autor and Acemoglu about and all the effects that automatization are going to have in the labor market. So I think that we should know first about non-cognitive abilities. These are really very important, but also some kind of other abilities such as working in groups, problem solving, which is something that you are really focusing, critical thinking, creativity, these kind of things that are going to become even more and more important in this global robotization world where now automatization is affecting heavily the labor market.
This is a really good introduction to the next topic. So we're going to start talking about what we need to assess. So there's a lot of conversation about the roles of cognitive skills, the roles of foundational skills, the roles of non-cognitive skills, the roles of advanced skills, and it becomes really hard to narrow down. So PIAAC takes place every 10 years. We have one opportunity for data collection. That database is usually alive for between the surveys. So we need to make sure that we cover the important areas. So Beatrice, I want to talk to you first. What content areas could be cut, rotated, to free space for policy relevant measures, which could include more non-cognitive, which is something that we hear often?
Well, first of all, from a NPM point of view, I have to say there is the clear need for cuts, even in its current design. The PIAAC assessment is much too lengthy. It is very hard to convince respondents to participate in this 2-hour-plus assessment. Having said that, of course, it is not surprising that I will urge to keep the non-cognitive skills. I think this is really unique for PIAAC, and it will even support future cycles of PIAAC to have non-cognitive skills included. Of course, I also would love to see the facet level included, so the more nuanced level included in future cycles of PIAAC, as I think there is a real merit of including these more detailed aspects of non-cognitive skills. However, there are voices demanding a skill assessment for non-cognitive skills, so really have a direct assessment of them. Coming from personality psychology, coming from the assessment of personality, I have seen several attempts in this direction over the last decades, and they all more or less failed. I am still convinced that questionnaire-based assessment is still the right way to have self-reported non-cognitive skills. But having said that, I think that that more or less the length of the module can stay as it is, a bit more detailed, as I mentioned, perhaps including additional measures, collaboration, as you mentioned, or other aspects. You asked me where to cut. Well, it's always hard to make suggestions because, of course, there are always voices defending other aspects, and so it's a difficult task. To my understanding, I think there is room to cut on the side of the cognitive assessment. There are 3 domains that are highly overlapping. There are correlations in the 90s among these 3 skill domains. This is not surprising, as they are all highly text-based. Yeah? So they all have a common aspect of literacy within them. And so I think the unique contribution by the 2nd or 3rd domain is rather limited. So if I were in your situation, I would reduce the number of skill domains in a future cycle.
Thank you. So James, I'm going to come back to you. With the competing goals that we have in terms of relevance and comparability,
Sure.
and the request to shorten the assessment.
Sure, thank you. I think you're going to find a bit of agreement with me and Beatrice on this one.
What is the minimum core that we must ensure to make sure that this balance doesn't go
Yeah.
off balance?
Yeah. I think that's the discussion that's going to be going on over the next 18 months to 2 years, isn't it? I don't think we're going to solve it within the next hour or so. But I don't think it's any surprise to think that I'm on sort of team relevance, but I think that's obviously, it's far more complex than that and probably better described as a spectrum rather than a binary choice. And then, of course, we add into the other variable of the survey mode and administration as well. Although that's not to underestimate the flexibility and compromise that's likely to play out over the next couple of years as Cycle 3 is designed. I mean, we probably should go back to the original scope of PIAAC to measure the basic skills that adults need for work in an everyday life. And I liked what Anne said yesterday about basic not being simple, but being the basis on which aspects of other societal involvement sits. I think there's still a very compelling and convincing argument that will retain literacy and numeracy skills, accepting that our demonstration and manifestation of those skills will have changed over time. And even someone leaning onto the innovation in PIAAC end of the spectrum, I think that still remain as its core. Alluding to what Beatrice said, I'm interested in the proposal of some sort of composite domain for literacy and numeracy, which as a result will either reduce the burden overall for the respondent or free up capacity for further innovative domains. Andrea Slyter's mantra about we're educating children for jobs that won't exist rings a bit true, I think, in PIAAC stage that we are now. At this stage of planning cycle 2, let alone cycle 1, did we know about the impact of AI and society's almost total reliance on digital devices to access goods and services, news, opinions, gossip, music, film, TV, pictures of kittens, etc. But personally, I'd like to, and my colleagues saying here as well, I'd like to see some sort of measure of critical thinking as well, an assessment built into the literary aspects of PIAAC. Assessing and processing information at face value is no longer the be-all and end-all of extracting value and utility out of content. Without a sound judgment as to what you're looking at is true or manipulative. Once you get past assessment, then when you get past that assessment, you can go on to judging whether the content is useful, informative, entertaining or funny, disturbing or provocative. But I think the idea of what we collect in Cycle 3 is intrinsic to the topic that's going to become following as to how we collect it. And I guess we'll go into a bit more detail about that in a minute.
So I want to come to you, Katju, a little bit. So we talk about skills that could matter in the democratic participation. And I think two that we talked about was clear communication and relational competencies. Do you have a suggestion on how these could be incorporated in PIAAC? Are these part of cognitive domains? Are these part of social skills or social and emotional skills? How can we accommodate these?
Well, first of all, I have to say or remind you that I come from the Ministry of Finance, so the cutting part would be much easier for me. That's our normal duty. Well, not mine. I work for the public governance, but I've been in the Ministry of Finance for so long, so the cutting part. So I want to emphasize that what I'm going to say is thinking out aloud. So I'm not suggesting to. I'm not making any official recommendation to add anything, but I'm just thinking about loud what I think and what we actually think in Finland and in the Ministry of Finance that are important things in our current society and in the future society when it comes to skills. And one of these I touched upon earlier a little bit is what we could call dialogue or listening skills. Not just listening to when somebody's reading a book to you, which was discussed earlier, but really kind of listening to each other, because that brings joint understanding. When you learn to listen, you listen to the others. It brings you understanding about what the others are saying. It brings you understanding also of your own thinking, and then about the things that you're talking about and of the society as a whole. So it's linked to these relational competencies. So I think these dialogue skills are very, very important in the future. I don't know how they could be added to the PIAAC or if there is anything that you could squeeze in. But what we are doing in Finland actually is that Prime Minister's Office, Ministry of Finance, the civil society, Finnish Innovation Fund, we have together made a program called National Dialogues, where people in Finland, and we're trying to especially reach those who are less well off, dialogue in small circles of 10 to 12 people. There's always a theme for 1.5 a year. And the idea is exactly the most important ideology behind that is that we are increasing everybody's dialogue competencies. Then the next thing is that it's important that Finnish people discuss, or people living in Finland discuss, current important issues. We've had the COVID, we've had the security, we've had trust, we've had living in uncertain times, we've had mental resources and so forth. And this way we also reach the people who are most disadvantaged. We also get the information from those dialogues to us, and it's very important background information to policy dialogue. But these are the sort of skills that we feel that strengthens democracy, decreases polarization, and is also, according to some international scientists, a very good way to fight radicalization in the society. So this is why I would love to see it. I know it's not easy, but it's Christmas time. So,
Dialogue
and
skills.
Santa Claus lives in
Okay,
Finland, so
noted.
I can wish,
Let's see how we can do that. I'm going to move to AI, and I'm going to go to Sanj. What foundational skills in this new AI era should PIAAC reflect? And then a follow-up on that, because I know you have the views on that. Whose perspective should we be looking at? Should we be considering the perspective of employers? Are we looking for the economy, the individuals? Just a short answer on that. I don't know if it's short, is it?
Okay, I would say that the first question, in an AI era, which foundational skills are critical, should we try to incorporate into PIAAC, actually is a very difficult question. The reason why is over the last 5 years in Singapore, under the SkillsFuture Singapore, we have been trying our best to analyze occupation changes based on work task changes and skills change. And we come to a realization that we cannot isolate skills. Because to perform a task, you need multiple skills. And therefore, if you were to ask me to say that what should be included, I would say everything to be included, but everything not to be included. So if I were to venture and say that how can we, if is there anything to cut and anything to merge, I'm trying to say that is there a way for us to consider not having isolated module on literacy and numeracy problem solving? Because in order to solve a problem, you actually need to use cognitive skills. You need to utilize, take for example, if you say that if I want to scan a photograph or a 35mm slide into digital format, you want to be able to print a big banner, and do you use DPI, PPI measure? You need to have both thinking skills, knowing what you want the outcome, and then the mathematics behind of what the conversion looks like, and then what is the size of the file you want to send across to print. So I'm trying to say is there a way for us to consider merging? I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, merging the three into one modality, not separately measuring it, but looking at tasks, the kind of tasks that people need to perform at daily life, the kind of tasks that people need to perform at work, and how the combinations of the three skills needed to use in that context. I think so that will be my direct answers to this segment of topic C. And the second part, you asked whether will the priority shift depending on whether we measure from the perspective of individual, employer, and economy. I think it goes back to the intention of PIAAC. I would assume the intention of PIAAC is to inform policy first. So then I would not want PIAAC to have a mission creep to say that suddenly you have an instrument for individuals to know about themselves, or the employer can use the instrument to know about their company's skill stock. I don't think so, because there are commercial instruments in the market that can do so, and therefore I think that PIAAC should stay to its true cause of informing policy. Yeah.
Thank you. So the first part of your question, for those of you at the BPC meeting, we did not talk about this before, about creating, this is new, but it is a direction that we are looking at in terms of shortening the cognitive assessment.
Yeah. Can I just add on just a quick comment, Claudia, is I know that because now, from now until 2020, before 2028, right, 2027, the team is looking into explorations. I'm just wondering, would it be helpful to bring in other field of expertise into the conversation? For example, data science, who are specialized in job and skill analysis, is one area that we can consider to bring them in. There are huge pool of expertise in the area, from Australia's Australia to Singapore's SkillsFuture Singapore and Burning Glass Institute. They are all these who has been studying this for over many, many years. The second field of study we can consider expertise is occupation psychologists, because they have been studying changing job role as well. So I think these are potentially two other field of expertise you can bring in. Thank you.
Thank you. I may come back to you on that. Ismael, you have done a lot of research using PIAAC data. Is there anything that we don't measure that you wish we could have, something that has prevented you from looking at the data from certain aspects?
Well, I think that particularly what you were talking about, making the PIAAC surveys shorter. So I don't know if it is the idea of including more issues, but I think that the main idea, what I feel that PIAAC could be improved, is try to have a subsample of individuals that are measured from cycle to cycle. I know that this is going to increase cost. This is just to make it longitudinal, so I know that this is going to increase cost. Is this related to my first point? My first point was, if you keep the identity number, then it's going to make possible that a subsample, because I know this is going to be very expensive, because in this way you can measure many things. You are going to be able to take into account individual factors, because the individual factors most of the times are very similar from even between 10 years. So, or your historical issues or your background. So, and in this way, it's going to be much easier to make an analysis. And the second point I would say is that maybe focusing on particular groups. So asking the countries, for instance, Sonia in the previous session, she was talking about parental leaves reforms. So maybe some countries, this is just an example, it could be done with teachers or whatever. So making a larger sample of women and men who have had a kid recently, making a larger sample so that this is just an example, so that this sample is representative, and you can try to measure what's the effect of the parental leave reform. So try to look for exogenous, as always trying to look for causality, and for looking for causality you have to look for exogenous reforms, and for this you would need to increase the sample. Another idea would be, for instance, we are talking about automatization, trying to make a larger sample of those who are working in the manufacturing sector, and let's see if for different sectors the use of robots are having different effects. So trying to talk with countries and ask them, are you interested in measuring a particular reform that you have done the last year? And then you have to increase the sample of those who are affected by this reform.
I think Beatrice wanted to say something.
If I may just reply to your suggestion, I'm really thankful for this suggestion. We had exactly this idea for the first cycle of PIAAC, and we did in Germany a longitudinal PIAAC study. And so we followed up the German PIAAC respondents for 3 more waves. We did a reassessment of the cognitive skills. We collected data from the full household. We have direct assessments of the cognitive skills also from the partners. And we still follow them up through the GSUP. And we linked it to administrative data. So we had the labor market information, the income data, employment data, etc. We had all this. The letter we had to delete due to confidentiality issues after a limited time, and it was awfully resource intense to do this connection. It was very costly, and it was completely underused, and then we deleted it. So yeah, but the PIAAC longitudinal data is still available through the GSUP, and I'm very happy if more researchers use it.
I was going to ask, actually, it's sad to hear that, because I was going to ask whether you would be able to replicate this now with Cycle 2, given the new data protection and regulations that are in place. So all of this is a big wish list. I hope Spain's data protection rules are very different from some of the other countries, even though it should be the GDPR. But that leads us to the next topic, which has to do with design. Right? So the design choices will impact cost, will impact comparability, will impact timeline. Right? So we know that any innovation that we do could impact any of these, and at the same time could impact comparability. So I'm going to start with Sunju in the case of, I know there's the household nature of PIAAC is a problem. So I'm going to start this conversation from the point that we need to find alternatives. Knocking in somebody's household today and asking, can I come in and can I sit on your kitchen table and do a 2-hour interview with you is not working anymore. So we are talking in terms of alternatives. So where can digital proctoring, automated validation, modular design responsibly reduce and speed the delivery of PIAAC?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question, because I think all of us who have been through Cycle 2 know how disruptive it was when pandemic hit all of us. Suddenly everything freeze, pause, and then later on when pandemic subsided, we start to send people back to knock on the door, and people got very upset. It's like, why a stranger coming to my house? And then we received tons of complaint letter, and people can you stop sending people to knock on my door? So I think that phase of experience taught us that we have to move beyond knocking on doors. And today the technology has allowed us, even in Singapore I've seen it, that from the healthcare perspective, when you try to survey a household who's staying in the house, and then what kind of what do you do, what do you eat, how do you exercise, do you take medicine, and they basically in Singapore they send a letter and say that all the individuals listed in this letter, please use your national identification login to answer these survey questions. So maybe some mother has the power to make sure the children answer, but minimally the mother tend to be the one that will answer the questions. So I think there are ways for us to still do the household using technology to say that scan a QR code, and then the thing is, how do you authenticate? Every country has a digital identity, maybe like Singapore, Finland, or Estonia may have, because we have the digital identity that is us. Then the proctoring, I think across the world, many kind of assessment systems now allow proctoring. Last year, I participated in this certification of data management professional. And first, you need to scan your surrounding and say, see, nobody's in my room. Then you sit down, and when you're ready, the video recording will start. And we just answer the question accordingly. Actually, the score already been scored automatically, but the AI algorithm behind the scene will evaluate whether it is a normal respondent, or they are abnormally in the way I respond. From the way I look at the questions, stay how long. Basically, technology would allow this to happen without having us to send people physically to knock at the door. So I think we should definitely explore this area. And I certainly think that having technology will not disadvantage people like senior. Actually, it will advantage them, because now that maybe we can use technology to say that instead of reading, you can have an interface with the avatar, to ask you questions, and you can answer the background questionnaire without even reading, because it can be using communications and instead of reading and typing. So I think we should definitely explore this kind of technology that are fairly developed. Yeah.
Thank you. You use the data. How is the 10-year cycle applicable and useful? Would you suggest something different?
I think that 10 years cycle is correct, because more years would be, so imagine that using 15 years, I think that would be really very long. So
the other way around.
Yes, I wanted first to close the door of doing it longer. So everybody, the newspapers would be forgetting about what was PIAAC. And less than 10 years, well, most of the time, so we are using data of PIAAC for analyzing process, so automatization, for instance, now how artificial intelligence is affecting education, for instance. So processes, globalization, so some process that takes time. So I think 10 years is enough I wouldn't do it shorter.
All right. James, how do we balance depth while reducing the burden of respondents?
That's the $64 million question, isn't it? I mean, at the risk of repeating what others have said, I mean, the very question that we're able to go to over 115,000 houses across the world and sit there for 2 hours asking lots of complicated questions for people is just unfeasible, really. And the two main reasons for that are for cost and the overall falling response rates in general to government-sponsored research. It's just a no-brainer. It's not going to happen like that again. But I like to think of it in the way that we've only had 2 PIAACs before. So the first cycle obviously was the first one, and the starting point for the data cycle, the data series. Cycle 2 was, as Sanz suggested, and reminded us, was done in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, where you couldn't even get a family member to visit you, let alone a PIAAC field worker. So to get over those hurdles and deliver cycle 2, we talk about it as the PIAAC family. It's always a PIAAC industry as well, isn't it? With thousands of interviewers, secretariat, contractors, and country leads. They all showed incredible flexibility and creativity to collect cycle 2. And I think that being able to be part of delivering cycle 2 that successfully is one of the highlights of my professional career, really, having had to get that done. But it came at huge financial and work capacity costs that I don't think that can be repeated. So my point being is that I don't think there's yet been a normal PIAAC. We haven't sort of had any sort of any 2 that are the same, despite the trend analysis that we're able to do. So sort of trying to shackle cycle 3 to what sort of you could call PIAAC traditions, but aren't traditions yet because they haven't really been established, is probably a bit premature and a bit limiting in our thinking at the moment. I know that GESIS are doing some work to investigate options on data collection, like the guided online assessments and a few other alternatives. And I'm really looking forward to the paper that they're coming to this week. But the thing is that what Claudia sort of alluded to is that any of these alternatives to the face-to-face, in-person assessments will compromise the gold standard of comparability to a larger or lesser extent. But I think what we have to reflect on in our discussions as we reach those conclusions is the sort of the threshold of acceptance of compromise, and I think that's going to I think different countries are going to come from that from different directions. And I know that the way the OECD works and the BPC works is through consensus, and I know that we had some issues in developing cycle 3 in terms of tablet versus paper-based, and we got which seems trivial now compared to what we're talking about now. But I think we'll have to work through those questions again.
Beatrice, a few words on shortening strategies. I know you have some views in terms of how can we do that while maintaining validity. Any ideas, any suggestions based on your experience?
Well, First of all, generally speaking, coming from a data quality perspective, I was always fascinated and impressed by the high standards that PIAAC is following, and this is why I like to be involved in PIAAC. And so I think it would not be beneficial for PIAAC to give up these high standards. However, I think shortening is the right way. By shortening, I think we can even increase data quality, as we will reduce non-response. We will reduce non-response bias by that. We will reduce fatigue and all the negative effects of fatigue, and by that even increase the resulting data quality. So how can we come to a reduction? I think the wrong way would be to reduce item batteries within themselves. So reduce questionnaires to one single indicator. This is usually not working, making them shorter to single indicators. We need, in many cases, multi-item batteries. What I think works better is kind of rotated module designs, so that not each respondent gets the same questions. Also, adaptive designs, especially for the cognitive skills, could work, where we use less items to identify the perfect level of skills for them. And I think we need to, what you should be doing is we need to analyze what aspects of the background questionnaire are really needed. And of course, there are defenders for all aspects of the questionnaire, but I think a literature search or also a policy relevance evaluation of the different aspects included would be beneficial, really, to say these aspects are nice to have and these are really crucial aspects.
Thank you. Katju, I'm going to wait on you because I want to merge the conversation when we talk about data policy, because as we collect data, we know that PIAAC only matters if the PIAAC is only relevant if it matters for policymaking. Let's put it this way. So we need a clear narrative. We need to find ways to communicate results in a way that is understandable, that is clear, that is somewhat simple. And at the same time, we know that the data is complex per se. So how do we avoid misinterpretation? And then I want to start with you, because when you talked about the easy, what is easy language? Yes. So that is, for me, a really interesting way of bringing information down. And I don't know if the only way is reading load. But when you talk about the media interpretation of PIAAC, it goes back to low skills, immigration, and things like that. How can we encourage communication of findings in a way that is not so alarming, that is not so negative? Is there a way to do a constructive, the way you talked about the easy language, for me, is one kind, you are adapting things down a little bit. How can we do that in terms of disseminating PIAAC?
Well, definitely easy language, even though it's really a language of its own, is something that is useful to everybody. So it's always better to have things in easy language than complicated civil servant language. So that's definitely one thing. That's a very tough question. What I started to think about your question is that I think that maybe looking a little bit differently about the different audiences or the different groups, I think that it would be one way to look at the results would be to look at who are the persons, or what are the how to communicate the good things, the will and the can people. Then there are those who won't but could, so how can we encourage those? Then those who don't want to train or don't want to participate, can't but would want to, and those then of course the most trickiest part is those who won't and couldn't. So we often place all the emphasis on this last part, those who are not interested and those who don't have the capacity. So we should have this equally, all these groups. So look at those who are willing and can, and also emphasize what's behind that. And this is the kind of, that's not a good answer, but that's
it's
the
really
kind of,
easy to see those alarmist headlines and things like that. Ismael, PIAAC is often, even within the OECD, we often focus on education and labor, which means employment, labor market, and the impact of that. How do we go beyond that? Do you have suggestions? How can we, when we talk about reporting and we talk about the impact, should and can we go beyond those two areas?
Yes, well, as I was saying before, one idea would be to give the possibility to countries to ask for an oversample, in particular parts of the population, to measure the effects of some of the reforms that they may have implemented in the last years. Another idea would be to involve also always the finance ministry and the economics ministry. I think that, and for instance, central governments, central banks. Here we have the experience of the Bank of Spain. They are really very much interested in also in economics of education, and I think that this is a way, because to some extent the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Economics, and I think this is true not only in Spain but also in many other countries, are more relevant than other ministries. It's not the same. So, and from my experience, what I notice is that the Ministry of Economics is really a very important one, and I think trying to involve them and the central banks would be a way of having like more importance, more relevance of the PIAAC results, because they might ask for some particular questions and they are going to use it in their political measures. Another idea would be also about trying to reach more audience, would be also using the same, for instance, measures as PISA. So I think that most of the education community knows a little bit already about the way of 500 measure and the standard deviations and so on. So it has takes a lot of time. It has taken a lot of time. So PIAAC could follow the same way of measuring the results, or because I think is more known. And finally, since PIAAC has so many topics and so many ideas, would be to follow, and well, to some extent you are doing already this, it would be only to make some more efforts on trying to publish different volumes as PISA is doing, and also using like short, like particular topics, or focusing one reports on a very small topic, one by one, not the very first day that the results are released.
Very good, thank you. James, PIAAC results trigger different levels of urgency, depending on whether they are low, whether they are high, whether they haven't changed, or things like that. How can we communicate findings in a way that encourages continuous improvement, even when they are not so alarming?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, my first response is there's alarming and there's alarming. So I go back to the fact earlier that despite the headline finding in cycle 2, it was okay. There were still 8.5 million adults in England with poor basic skills. Now, if David was still here, he'd probably say, and are we okay with that? I don't think we should be. You know, that's still a problem to be solved. Some countries obviously score better than others, and there's a danger that we get fixated on the league tables, I think, which in itself is a phrase I dislike anyway. But it's hard with these international surveys to move the narrative away from those international launch headlines to the domestic detail, which is where the real value, I think, lies in the surveys, especially as it sort of spreads out into the individual countries once the launch event's been packed away. And going back to the sort of domestic policy responses, I guess that's always going to be a function of whatever country's current administration is, its capacity, its interest, its political will to address basic skills. I don't know for sure, but there could be some PIAAC countries sitting here now that, you know, are choosing to ignore the poor performances or doubting their reliability. I think that's a real danger that we need to be open to. But I do think one of the built-in advantages of PIAAC is the long life cycle, like Ismael was just saying. So the data does have time to settle in and to be deeply analysed by ministries and academics over a good few years. I mean, it's towards the end of the life cycle, we do end up caveating that the data is almost a decade old. But again, England's 9 million adults still showed there was 8.5 million adults in cycle 2. And the political question hangs over each participating country faced with a PIAAC finding a significant proportion of their adults who don't have the skills to take part a full role in life and work. Are you okay with that? And what threshold have you got for seeing that as a problem? And I think if the reality of that in individual countries is where they are in their political system, I think that drives how importantly that takes taken and how loudly that narrative gets discussed.
Thank you very much. Sanju, how do we get political buy-in to our results? So I know it depends on the speed in which we release the results. It depends on the outcomes, of course, if they are high or low or things like that. What can we do to make cycle 3 indispensable for policymakers, both in terms of design and then how are we promising things at the end of the day?
That's very tough.
I know.
It's very tough to say that can we make cycle 3 indispensable for policymakers. And all of us know that in our countries, PIAAC is a data set that comes once every 10 years, unless you do extended study. And on top of that is we are on the other side, we already have other data that's ongoing collecting, whether it's by administrative data or evaluation data. So PIAAC is a complementary data to what we already have in our country. I think that is a fact. So I think to make PIAAC attractive, I say attractive means, well, I don't mind invest some money in it. I don't mind invest some money in it. The in between, that means how frequent can PIAAC data be collected and feedback to policy is 10 years too long? That's a question that we need to ask. Not 15 years, 10 years too long. Should we do a 5-year cycle? Because we know that when we collect data on the ground, is some sector, ICT sector, things changes at 3 to 6 months or sometimes weeks. So if you compare this interval of 10 years, I think it's just far too long. We need to consider the shortening it. That's my number one. Number 2 is really the cost. And all of it, NPM all know that if which part is the most costly is the data collection is the most costly. Today, the data collection most costly because we need to send people on the ground, not on the door, and we pay by per case and we pay by incentive. I think we need to ask ourselves how can we make this part more, I'm not saying to cut the budget, but to design in such a way that we can collect the data faster in a more reasonable manner. I think that is something that we need to think through how that's the most costly part. And the last part is about what is the actionable output. I want to try to answer the question you posed to James, which is, it is important to inform policymakers, but at the current point, it is difficult to tell, for the policymaker to tell the public, because the whisker chart of the high-low star shape here below has no meaning to the public at all or the enterprises. So I think at the next cycle, ideally is when we release the data, what does it mean to the policymaker is one set. What does it mean? What can they say to the public and the enterprises to say that, hey, we need to step out to do something together? Is what do you call it? Easy language?
We loved that. That's
We have to
official term, actually.
That's going to
we
be
have to make it really easy language, because otherwise when the press release go to the media just cut and paste, and nobody gonna take notice of PIAAC at all.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's quite important.
Thank you. So that takes me to Beatrice, who talks to the media a lot. And I know it focuses usually on low skilled. That's the topic. But I want to come back. How do we communicate non-cognitive skills and the importance of that for policymaking? Can you kind of shift to the direction and go from low skilled and cognitive to something about non-cognitive?
I love to. As this is my topic, I really like to do that. However, the PIAAC provides this data now for the first time. And we just started to analyze this wonderful data set. And I mean, you published your report last month. And I think there are very, very crucial insights for policymakers in this report. And we will start a research project next month in which we investigate the role, the impact of both cognitive and non-cognitive skills for central labor market outcomes, like income, training, skill mismatch. And we will use PIAAC data, but we will also use longitudinal data. And of course, we will communicate our results primarily to research outlets. But we are very happy to work with you, and especially also with Anya, in communicating these results to policymakers and showing the relevance of both cognitive and non-cognitive skills for central outcomes.
Thank you. I'm going to stop this conversation, and I'm going to ask the public to, or the participants here, to ask questions to our panelists. Francesca. Oh, you want to take this one?
I like the easy language as well. At the same time, I do worry about people thinking that they understand more than they actually do. And I'll give you an example of this. We just came out with a report, and everyone freaks out because we talk about standard deviations, which probably is not easy language, but I don't know. But then everyone, I've worked in both PIS and PIAAC, and everyone then on PIAAC tells me, hey, but it's just 10 points. When the same amounts in PISA, which has a standard deviation that is double that, then they think it's a small thing, and they automatically think that just because they understand the word points means they understand quantity. Is 10 points big or is it small? And that depends on your standard deviation. So one of my questions is, how can you actually, and I really do think that one of the big messages of PIAAC is, actually maybe it's very costly to increase the skills of the population. You want to decrease the difficulty of key texts that some people need to be exposed to. But sometimes it's very, very hard. And I don't know how to do that. How do you do it in Finland? Does it work? Do people think they understand more than they actually can understand?
So can I, before I let you talk a little bit, my understanding of the easy language was in terms of public service. We are using that in a more broad way, but I think when you first mentioned it was, how do we communicate tasks that people need to do within the government and public service to a way that the low-skilled can do? Like my mom is having a hard time with banks, for example, online banking. So with that, can you explain a little bit more easy language?
Easy language is actually a language of its own. It's very, very easy. It's structurally more easy, less words and other things. So it's a very, very easy language. And like I said, 14% of Finnish people need that. They can be elderly people, migrants, whatever. But then there is also clear language, and that's the kind of clear language. So there are different kinds of, and of course you have to think about to whom is it what is your audience for that? So I think clear language is something that we do a lot, and everybody of us can do clear language, but none of us probably can do easy language because you have to train at a university and otherwise to be able to use easy language. But I just want to say one thing. Anybody of us can be in a position that we also need easy language, for instance, in a hospital, in a traumatic situation. So that's why it's very, very important in the public services to have as much information in easy language. And it's also good to think the clear language to go as easy as it can with your kind of notes. Yeah.
I want to attempt to, maybe as a response to Francesca's, whether people can understand, or they think they understand. So I think at the end of the day is, there is a community like ourselves who are very, very familiar with the lingo of PIAAC. Because we live, breathe, and then we've been with it for 20 years, no? But to a general public or the employers, they will ask, what does it mean to me? And we have to answer that question is, what do I have to care, and what does it mean to me? And if we want them to know that skills really matter in your life, and in your work, and in your business, then we need to answer, what does it mean to me? I think that's what I'm trying to say. So we're not trivializing the professional work that we do, to say that pare it down until there is no high citation, there is no theoretical foundation. No, it's not. But when we translate it to another community of readers, how do you help them understand what it really matters to you? I think that's what I'm trying to say. And I would say that in maybe in cycle 3, when we have thematic report, let's have something that 1 or 2 reports is really speaking to the public about what does it mean to you.
To you. Okay, go ahead, Beatrice.
Just as an anecdote to that, I think we can communicate PIAAC results in a very clear language without using terms like standard deviations. I try to avoid in my report even the term correlation. But as you said, we are so into our understanding of PIAAC that it was very helpful for me before going in front of the press to have a journalist coach me, and that he trained me. He gave me feedback on the messages that I wanted to communicate, and so really to provide these messages more from the point of view, what does it mean to the public, what we really found out. Thank you.
Next question.
Thank you to the panelists. It's not really a question, but actually I heard mentioned a lot of talking about reducing, shortening the assessment, maybe combining literacy and numeracy because they are highly correlated. My first comment related to that, the top priority, I think it is to keep the quality, the high quality that Beatrice mentioned of PIAAC, and make it more relevant, keep it the relevance as is. Otherwise, we lose why we care about PIAAC anymore if it's not high quality assessment and give us the data that employer policymakers need. So from the other perspective, I see that talking about that even they are highly correlated does not mean that there is redundant. They are not redundant. For example, in PISA, literacy and math, reading, and science, they are highly correlated, especially science and reading. But that not means even they are 0.8 correlation, that means they share the variance about 64%, but still there is unique variance about 36%. So this is number one. Unless you decided as an expert for literacy and numeracy, you decide to say, we don't need distinct score for each literacy and numeracy. We need a general factor or a latent score as a whole ability indicator. No longer we need literacy and numeracy, but this is impact the trend and others, and we need to go back to reanalyze the data from cycle 1 and cycle 2. Another question about, I think we need to talk about the flexibility. I think Beatrice also mentioned that, about flexibility. The core of PIAAC is related to the cognitive and non-cognitive, both of them. But if you drop the cognitive dramatically, it will impact the quality of assessment. I'm talking maybe from expertise as ETSer. That's the most important to me is the cognitive. But for the non-cognitive, it's added substance as well for other policymaker and important stuff. So why not make it flexible modules, core modules that's needed for all the PIAAC audience, and maybe flexible as needed for within each country to make it flexible. We have 11 modules within the questionnaire today. Thank you so much.
Yes, it's important to know the skills in maths and literacy, reading, and also problem solving. Particularly, for instance, there is right now in the last years there is some research showing that the fact that there are fewer women doing STEM jobs might be that the relative advantage between reading and math. So we need both of them. So there is some papers showing that women who are really good in maths, they are also really good in reading, even more in reading. Whereas men who are really good in math, they are not always so good in reading. So that means that there are more men having relative advantage in maths than women, even if women are really good also in math. So we need both of them, for instance, to check whether this relative advantage is one of the factors explaining why is it that we have fewer women in STEM that we would like above all, because these are the topics leading to jobs with higher earnings.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sam. I think, Anya, you have a question?
I have a question, I think probably for Sunju and for James. You're probably the people who most involved in convincing your own governments in continuing PIAAC. What do you need as ammunition to convince them to continue? Or do you need nothing? Are they convinced?
No. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, very gracious. I mean, in one sense, it's everything that we've been talked about so far, really. It's making the case that PIAAC is an incredibly valuable and useful resource of information on a huge part of the population of the country that doesn't really get very well served with surveys elsewhere. A lot of the people who take part in PIAAC will have been decades away from formal education, and the interface that a government has with them and their learning and improving their skills is very limited compared to the PISA cohort or the people who are still in higher education. There's still a handle to influence them. I think once people get to that sort of 24 and they're out of education or younger, they're out there on their own, essentially. So any sort of source of information that can help governments target policies to help those people, I think, is A, unique, and B, very valuable. And I think that's the core of the message that we give when we try to persuade the politicians to invest several £1 million in taking part in PIAAC. But hopefully then by cycle 3 that'll be easier, because we'll be meeting in the middle in terms of cost and value.
Yeah, I would say that it is not cheap to participate in PIAAC. It's not cheap at all. And a lot of time, our team in SSG is trying to justify to Ministry of Finance why the money must put on the table, and we keep saying that, oh, at least minimally it is a direct assessment of skills, this is the only instrument in the world, and at least we can do benchmarking. I think these are the only two reasons we always put forth, and like I said, it will be difficult if the costs become more and more expensive, and we cannot justify the usage. And after cycle 1, we learn in cycle 2 is before even the PIAAC data is out. I think my colleague Fiona is here with me. Is we have already started to engage a lot of researchers across different fields to be interested to say that when the data is out, I will be using it, because it's no use collecting a lot of data and no one cares, no one want to use it. So a lot of prep work has been ongoing, and we're still trying to learn better how to even ourselves commissioning studies that we can see the longer term benefit of not just collected the data, spends $6 to $8 million, and then the data sits there and nobody use it. So there's a lot of justification of the usage and the relevance, because from the policy perspective, in Singapore we don't depend on PIAAC to make policy. Then I think the country will be static, never do. We have a lot of other data point to make policy, inform policy, but to say that, well, this is a money well spent is about the benchmarking that we can compare.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to close this session. I know we could, there's one,
And
I'm
mine
gonna
is
take-
more of a reflection, right? Like coming from the World Bank, and also, you know, like I'm a person that my career profile is in the intersection between research and policy, right? Like, so when I hear you speaking, my first reaction is that we who work, you know, for the public good in the public sector tend to be very humble about our contributions. If I had here, you know, people seated representing the private sector, they would sell harder what they have. So that's the first thing I want to say. So I also want to say that it's a bit unfair to say that these data are not being, you know, used extensively because studies that are produced with this data do not publish well. Okay, as a researcher, and as somebody who is also in charge of the knowledge agenda on labor market and skills, I can tell you that our best reports have, you know, a download number of in the low hundreds. If it's an institutional report, it's in the low thousands. So that's not the way in which we really influence the world. Evidence is not only research, so it's not where we should, you know, focus our efforts. What I do think is that we need to start moving beyond the use of this data for diagnosis into things that are more actionable, into the programming. And again, like when I hear this conversation, I feel that we are trying to find a technical solution to a problem that, at least as an outsider to me, looks more as a business management model type of problem. If you think about the data sets that are being created by, you know, private sector stakeholders like Lightcast, etc., the data is very sector specific, more limited in reach, in-country coverage also more limited. They have greater granularity, which allows them to do other type of analysis. But really what makes them successful is that they have been able to think smartly about what other, you know, value-added services they add around this thing. And so I would like to, you know, push you to think about that. And I also believe that partnership models, right? Rather than shortening the questionnaires, is what is your comparative advantage versus, you know, other people who can do that last mile of data collection, where you should focus your efforts and where you should be working with these other players that are already in the space, so that you know, have a comprehensive data set.
Thank you very much. I promised I wouldn't go over time, and it's 5:01, so I'm sorry about that. But I do want to ask for one more thing. One final thought, few seconds. What top priority should we think about cycle 3, or one concrete action? Very quick.
Okay, I think it has to be the cost effectiveness, because I fear that if we don't tackle that, we're likely to have more countries dropping out than from lack of comparability.
Okay. It could be policy.
Just keep the society, the whole of society in mind when you're doing that extra.
Including the facets is really beneficial.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would reiterate what I said earlier on, which is when we think about policy impact, do include not just skills and education and lifelong learning policy, but include the industrial policy segment of it. So that's how we will rethink what in the background questionnaire is all about. Yeah.
Thank you.
Make PIAAC so that it can be used to analyze the effect of political reforms in education, labor markets, economics, or whatever.
That is a delicate area. So thank you very much to my panelists. Thank you. Since I am the last one and I know they're going to come up, I do want to thank the Spanish team and all the helps, our moderators and everything else for that. We appreciate you hosting us. But in particular, I want to thank my teammates, Sabrina and Mila, who took a lot of work to organize this conference. So thank you. And there it is. Thank you very much. Can we take one picture of the group here?